Classical Marxism refers to the economic, philosophical, and sociological theories expounded by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, as contrasted with later developments in Marxism, especially Leninism and Marxism. Leninism. Karl Marx. Karl Heinrich Marx was an immensely influential German philosopher, sociologist, political economist, and revolutionary socialist. Marx addressed a wide range of issues, including alienation and exploitation of the worker, the capitalist mode of production, and historical materialism, although he is most famous for his analysis of history in terms of class struggles, summed up in the opening line of the introduction to the Communist Manifesto. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. The influence of his ideas, already popular during his life, was given added impetus by the victory of the Russian Bolsheviks in the 1917 October Revolution, and there are few parts of the world which were not significantly touched by Marxian ideas in the course of the 20th century. As the American Marx scholar Hal Draper remarked, there are few thinkers in modern history whose thought has been so badly misrepresented by Marxists and anti-Marxists alike. Early influences. The early influences on Marx are often grouped into three categories: German philosophy, English, Scottish political economy, and French socialism. German philosophy. Main influences: Immanuel Kant, G.W. Hegel, Ludwig Feuerbach. Marx studied under one of Hegel's pupils, Bruno Bauer, a leader of the circle of young Hegelians to whom Marx attached himself. However, from 1841, Marx and Engels came to disagree with Bruno Bauer and the rest of the young Hegelians about socialism and also about the usage of Hegel's dialectic, and progressively broke away from German idealism and the young Hegelians. Marx's early writings are thus a response towards Hegel, German idealism, and a break with the rest of the young Hegelians. Marx stood Hegel on his head, in his own view of his role, by turning the idealistic dialectic into a materialistic one, in proposing that material circumstances shape ideas, instead of the other way around. In this, Marx was following the lead of Feuerbach. His theory of alienation, developed in the economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, inspired itself from Feuerbach's critique of the alienation of man in God through the objectivation of all his inherent characteristics. But Marx also criticized Feuerbach for being insufficiently materialistic. English and Scottish political economy. Main influences: Adam Smith and David Ricardo. Marx built on and critiqued the most well-known political economists of his day, the British classical political economists. Marx critiqued Smith and Ricardo for not realizing that their economic concepts reflected specifically capitalist institutions, not innate natural properties of human society, and could not be applied unchanged to all societies. He proposed a systematic correlation between labor values and money prices. He claimed that the source of profits under capitalism is value added by workers not paid out in wages. This mechanism operated through the distinction between labor power, which workers freely exchanged for the wages, and labor, over which asset-holding capitalists thereby gained control. This practical and theoretical distinction was Marx's primary insight, and allowed him to develop the concept of surplus value, which distinguished his works from that of Smith and Ricardo. French socialism. Main influences: Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Charles Fourier, Henri de Saint-Simon, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Louis Blanc. Rousseau was one of the first modern writers to seriously attack the institution of private property, and therefore is sometimes considered a forebear of modern socialism and communism, though Marx rarely mentions Rousseau in his writings. In 1833, France was experiencing an number of social problems arising out of the Industrial Revolution. A number of sweeping plans of reform were developed by thinkers on the left. Among the more grandiose were the plans of Charles Fourier and the followers of Saint-Simon. Fourier wanted to replace modern cities with utopian communities, while the Saint-Simonians advocated directing the economy by manipulating credit. Although these programs didn't have much support, they did expand the political and social imagination of Marx. Louis Blanc is perhaps best known for originating the social principle, later adopted by Marx, of how labor and income should be distributed, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon participated in the February 1848 uprising and the composition of what he termed the First Republican Proclamation of the New Republic, but he had misgivings about the new government because it was pursuing political reform at the expense of the socio-economic reform, which Proudhon considered basic. Proudhon published his own perspective, A Reform, Solution to Problemi Social, in which he laid out a program of mutual financial cooperation among workers. He believed this would transfer control of economic relations from capitalists and financiers to workers. It was Proudhon's book What is Property that convinced the young Karl Marx that private property should be abolished. Other influences on Marx. Main influences: Friedrich Engels, Ancient Greek Materialism, Giambattista Vico, Lewis H. Morgan. Marx's revision of Hegelianism was also influenced by Engels' book, The Condition of the Working Classes in England in 1844, which led Marx to conceive of the historical dialectic in terms of class conflict and to see the modern working class as the most progressive force for revolution. Marx was influenced by antique materialism, especially Epicurus for his materialism and theory of Glenamen, which opened up a realm of liberty. Giambattista Vico propounded cyclical theory of history, according to which human societies progress through a series of stages from barbarism to civilization and then return to barbarism. In the first stage, called the Age of the Gods, religion, the family, and other basic institutions emerge. In the succeeding Age of Heroes, the common people are kept in subjection by a dominant class of nobles. In the final stage, the Age of Men, the people rebel and win equality, but in the process society begins to disintegrate. Vico's influence on Marx is obvious. Marx drew on Lewis H. Morgan and his social evolution theory. He wrote a collection of notebooks from his reading of Lewis Morgan, but they are regarded as being quite obscure and only available in scholarly editions. Friedrich Engels. Friedrich Engels was a 19th-century German political philosopher. He developed communist theory alongside his better-known collaborator, Karl Marx. In 1842, his father sent the young Engels to England to help manage his cotton factory in Manchester. Shocked by the widespread poverty, Engels began writing an account which he published in 1845 as The Condition of the Working Class in England in 1844. In July 1845, Engels went to England. There he met an Irish working-class woman named Mary Burns, with whom he lived until her death in 1863. Later he lived with her sister, Lizzie, marrying her the day before she died in 1877. These women may have introduced him to the Chartist movement, of whose leaders he met several, including George Harney. Engels actively participated in the Revolution of 1848, taking part in the uprising at Elberfeld. Engels fought in the Baden campaign against the Prussians as the aide-de-camp of August Willich, who commanded a Free Corps in the Baden-Palatinate uprising. Marx and Engels. Marx and Engels first met in person in September 1844. They discovered that they had similar views on philosophy and on capitalism and decided to work together, producing a number of works including Die Heilige Family. After the French authorities deported Marx from France in January 1845, Engels and Marx decided to move to Belgium, which then permitted greater freedom of expression than some other countries in Europe. Engels and Marx returned to Brussels in January 1846, where they set up the Communist Correspondence Committee. In 1847, Engels and Marx began writing a pamphlet together, based on Engels' The Principles of Communism. They completed the 12,000-word pamphlet in 6 weeks, writing it in such a manner as to make communism understandable to a wide audience, and published it as the Communist Manifesto in February 1848. In March, Belgium expelled both Engels and Marx. They moved to Cologne, where they began to publish a radical newspaper, the Neue Rheinische Zeitung. By 1849, both Engels and Marx had to leave Germany and move to London. The Prussian authorities applied pressure on the British government to expel the two men, but Prime Minister Lord John Russell refused. With only the money that Engels could raise, the Marx family lived in extreme poverty. The contributions of Marx and Engels to the formation of Marxist theory have been described as inseparable. After Marx's death in 1883, Engels devoted much of the rest of his life to editing and translating Marx's writings. However, he also contributed significantly to feminist theory, seeing for instance the concept of monogamous marriages having arisen because of the domination of men over women for the purpose of transferring property to their heir male children. In this sense, he ties communist theory to the family, arguing that men have dominated women just as the capitalist class has dominated workers. Engels died in London in 1895. Main ideas. Marx's main ideas included alienation. Marx refers to the alienation of people from aspects of their human nature. He believed that alienation is a systematic result of capitalism. Under capitalism, the fruits of production belong to the employers, who expropriate the surplus created by others and in so doing generate alienated labor. Alienation describes subjective features of a person's situation in capitalism. It isn't necessarily for them to believe or feel that they are alienated. Base and superstructure. Marx and Engels use the base structure concept to explain the idea that the totality of relations among people with regard to the social production of their existence forms the economic basis, on which arises a superstructure of political and legal institutions. To the base corresponds the social consciousness, which includes religious, philosophical, and other main ideas. The base conditions both the superstructure and the social consciousness. A conflict between the development of material productive forces and the relations of production causes social revolutions, and the resulting change in the economic basis will sooner or later lead to the transformation of the superstructure. For Marx, though, this relationship is not a one-way process. It is reflexive. The base determines the superstructure in the first instance at the same time as it remains the foundation of a form of social organization which is itself transformed as an element in the overall dialectical process. The relationship between superstructure and base is considered to be a dialectical one, ineffable in a sense except as it unfolds in its material reality in the actual historical process. Class consciousness. Class consciousness refers to the awareness, both of itself and of the social world around it, that a social class possesses, and its capacity to act in its own rational interests based on this awareness. Thus, class consciousness must be attained before the class may mount a successful revolution. Other methods of revolutionary action have been developed, however, such as vanguardism. Exploitation. Marx refers to the exploitation of an entire segment or class of society by another. He sees it as being an inherent feature and key element of capitalism and free markets. The profit gained by the capitalist is the difference between the value of the product made by the worker and the actual wage that the worker receives. In other words, capitalism functions on the basis of paying workers less than the full value of the labor, in order to enable the capitalist class to turn a profit. Historical materialism. Historical materialism was first articulated by Marx, although he himself never used the term. It looks for the causes of developments and changes in human societies in the way in which humans collectively make the means to life, thus giving an emphasis, through economic analysis, to everything that coexists with the economic base of society, means of production. The means of production are a combination of the means of labor and the subject of labor used by workers to make products. The means of labor include machines, tools, equipment, infrastructure, and all those things with the aid of which man acts upon the subject of labor and transforms it. The subject of labor includes raw materials and materials directly taken from nature. Means of production by themselves produce nothing. Labor power is needed for production to take place. Ideology. Without offering a general definition for ideology, Marx on several instances has used the term to designate the production of images of social reality. According to Engels, ideology is a process accomplished by the so-called thinker consciously, it is true, but with a false consciousness. The real motive forces impelling him remain unknown to him, otherwise it simply would not be an ideological process. Hence he imagines false-seeming motive forces, because the ruling class controls the society's means of production. The superstructure of society, as well as its ruling ideas, will be determined according to what is in the ruling class's best interests. As Marx said famously in the German Ideology, the ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas, i.e., the class which is the ruling material force of society, is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. Therefore, the ideology of a society is of enormous importance since it confuses the alienated groups and can create false consciousness such as commodity, fetishism, mode of production. The mode of production is a specific combination of productive forces and social and technical relations of production. Political economy. The term political economy originally meant the study of the conditions under which production was organized in the nation-states of the newborn capitalist system. Political economy, then, studies the mechanism of human activity in organizing material, and a mechanism of distributing the surplus or deficit that is the result of that activity. Political economy studies the means of production, specifically capital, and how this manifests itself in economic activity. Marx's concept of class. Marx believed that class identity was configured in the relations with the mode of production. In other words, a class is a collective of individuals who have a similar relationship with the means of production. Marx describes several social classes in capitalist societies, including primarily the proletariat, those individuals who sell their labor power, and who, in the capitalist mode of production, do not own the means of production. According to Marx, the capitalist mode of production establishes the conditions for the bourgeoisie to exploit the proletariat due to the fact that the worker's labor power generates an added value greater than his salary. The bourgeoisie, those who own the means of production and buy labor power from the proletariat, who are recompensed by a salary, thus exploiting the proletariat. The bourgeoisie may be further subdivided into the very wealthy bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie. The petty bourgeoisie are those who employ labor, but may also work themselves. These may be small proprietors, land-holding peasants, or trade workers. Marx predicted that the petty bourgeoisie would eventually be destroyed by the constant reinvention of the means of production and the result of This would be the forced movement of the vast majority of the petty bourgeoisie to the proletariat. Marx also identified the lumpen proletariat, a stratum of society completely disconnected from the means of production. Marx also describes the communists as separate from the oppressed proletariat. The communists were to be a unifying party among the proletariat. They were educated revolutionaries who could bring the proletariat to revolution, and help them establish the democratic dictatorship of the proletariat. The communists, according to Marx, would support any true revolution of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. Thus, the communists aid the proletariat in creating the inevitable classless society. Marx's theory of history. The Marxist theory of historical materialism understands society as fundamentally determined by the material conditions at any given time. This means the relationships which people enter into with one another in order to fulfill their basic needs, for instance to feed and clothe themselves and their families. In general, Marx and Engels identified 5 successive stages of the development of these material conditions in Western Europe: primitive communism, Asiatic, ancient slave society, feudalism, modern bourgeois society.